You guys will go ahead and take your Bibles and turn to 1 Samuel. We're in chapter 11 today. 1 Samuel chapter 11. We will go through this short chapter for our time this morning. But to be able to just remind everybody where we have been, if you guys remember back in I believe chapter 9, whenever we were talking about the people, instead it was actually chapter 7 through 8, whenever we were talking about the people demanding a king. They didn't ask for one, they demanded one. And if you remember me talking about, there was they had a good reason. There was a tragedy about to happen, and we're about to go through the tragedy this morning. But in 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1, if you look with me there, it says that then Nahash the Ammonite went up and besieged Jabesh Gilead. And so there is an army on the way to Israel. This is on the fringes on the west side of the Jordan, coming to a small town, and they're actually causing this crisis that we're going to talk about today. But if we were to flip over to chapter 12, and verse 12 of the chapter, Samuel tells the people this: "And when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, 'No, but a king shall reign over us when the Lord your God was your king.'" And so we begin to see what the real issue was. We talked about this need for security, and whenever a tragedy strikes, that is whenever people, let's say they begin to panic a little bit. Okay? And their panicking was with a very real issue. And an army was coming to invade their country. And so they panicked and took their faith from believing in God to believing in someone who would hold an office, the king. They demanded this king. And so we begin to see that was a really real thing. I mean, they were scared for a very real reason, and then they rejected for what we would say, you know what, I think we can give them a pass on that one, okay? Because we would probably react in a very similar fashion. But this whole issue about the king that we're going to be speaking about today, this is something that the Lord He takes opportunity of the crisis that is being created here in order to kind of set the people back and refocus their hearts and be able to bring them back to Himself. But it is a very, very desperate situation, as what you will see here in just a moment. But about a year and a half ago, I was in what I would say a very desperate situation. Never really had anything like this happen before, so I never haven't had it happen ever since. But really, just basically, really mentally and emotionally, work was draining me. Okay, Seth was just born at the time, and I know whenever you guys see that smiling face, you don't believe there's anything bad about the boy. But to be honest, I mean, he was just not feeling good, and whenever he doesn't feel good, everybody else doesn't feel good because of how loud Seth often gets. It's and so with that, there was a lot of sleepless nights as we were working through all of those different things, and virtually I was going downhill. For months, it was just as if I was bleeding out from one wound after another. And really, I got to this point that all I can be able to describe to you as, and some of you would be able to take the words out of my mouth, is that just mentally and emotionally, I felt like I was in a deep, dark hole and I couldn't feel my way out of it. Okay. And whenever I was to the point, I'd go to mentors hoping they would bring me some sort of relief, because I was asking this question over and over and over again: will I ever be relieved of this? And I was just like, I just want the darkness to go away. I want to go back to normal, okay? And so whenever I was asking those questions, I was just, will I ever find relief? Was it just going to be like this the rest of my life? Many of you know such desperate situations. I actually had one shared with me this morning. But in Psalm chapter 13, verses 1 and 2, I want to be able to direct your attention to this, because this is where the Bible allows the rubber to meet the road in all of our life circumstances, okay? That it really does. God has written His Word in order to address every human situation and every human thought that is going to ultimately bring our attention back to Him. And in Psalm chapter 13, verses 1 and 2, Grayson, would you go ahead and flip over to that slide? But it asks these questions. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? This is a lament, a cry out from David in a very desperate situation. Really, if we could be able to try to put some words to it, that he endured as long as he possibly could, and he realized that he could not persevere in his own strength any longer. And that is the place where he writes that psalm. How long are you going to forget me? Will I ever find relief? Will I ever find my way out of this desperate situation? He needed divine intervention, in other words. But this is going to be something that we're going to get to see, because I'm going to start taking this principle and just applying it to the nation of Israel as a whole. But I'm going to say this kind of prematurely, but I can't help it. Is that whenever God is seeing you in a desperate situation, we often just want Him to take us out of it, relieve us of it, to where we don't have to go through it any longer. But what we see God do over and over and over again through Scripture is not take us out of the situation, but strengthen us to go through the situation of whatever it might be. So what we're asking for is probably something that the Lord isn't going to answer. What we're asking for is God to, in a sense, become this genie that just takes us out of reality, but God is a God of reality. And He will take us through the situation because He is the one who sees the end. And you don't exactly see it whenever we are down in a deep, dark hole. Israel finds himself in a very desperate situation because this attack, this is an attack on the nation of Israel. It is about to sweep through the nation and not just remain on the fringes. This is something that they are absolutely devastated by the news that the army has now arrived inside of Israel's boundaries, because they know what the end of the story probably would be unless they have divine intervention. And as the people of God, this is what God is going to call them to, is that in a desperate situation that they will be asking, how long, O Lord? How long are you just going to stay silent? How long, Lord, is your chosen man, the king that we've been asking for, is he just not going to do anything? Is it he's at home farming while everybody else or while the other people are being attacked? How long until there will be relief, or is this the end? Okay, and that's exactly what 1 Samuel chapter 11 helps us answer this morning. Okay? And so look with me now in verses 1 through 4, and we'll see how this story unfolds. God's Word says this: The Nahash the Ammonite went up and besieged Jabesh Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, Make a treaty with us, and we will serve you. But Nahash the Ammonite said to them, On this condition I will make a treaty with you, that I gouge out all your right eyes, and thus bring disgrace on all Israel. The elders of Jabesh said to them, Give us 7 days' respite, that we may send messengers through all the territory of Israel. Then, if there is no one to save us, we will give ourselves up to you. When the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, they reported the matter in the ears of the people, and all the people wept aloud. And so verses 1 through 4 is our first point this morning, is just a crisis. A crisis. But whenever a crisis hits, Okay, what I found in my short time here on the earth is that there's hardly ever a simple solution to whatever the crisis is. If there was a simple solution to it, probably is not a crisis. Okay, it's like, but what we are about to see is I try to go a little bit deeper and underneath the surface of the biblical working here as we study a little bit of Israel's history. What we're about to see is how God has been working in the past in order to create a solution for the present. Okay? And so as we recall some of this history here in a moment, please try to track with me how God has been at work through the generations in order to provide a solution for the present crisis that we're reading about here. Okay? And so just talk about the present threat. So once again, this is Nahash. His name means snake. He's a general for the Ammonite army. Nahash the snake. That's how Sarah likes to refer to him as. Okay? It's a little bit easier to remember. But he comes to the Jabesh Gilead, and like I said, the people, they knew about Nahash the snake, because he's been wreaking havoc throughout all of their neighboring countries, and so they knew that they were probably going to be on his hit list here before long, and now he shows up at Jabesh in order to begin his siege on the country of Israel. This is the present threat. Remember, Israel does not have an organized army. Remember, they've been divided for years. Remember that they've been doing what was right in their own eyes and really not truly following God, though every time He said there's been a threat, God has delivered them year after year, time after time. And so, as He's coming to Jabesh, they don't really have anything ready for this. They're not prepared for a war, so to speak. But he says that I'm going to make a treaty with you. This doesn't sound like a treaty I want to be a part of, okay? He's like, but I'm going to make a treaty with you guys, and I'm going to come and gouge out all the right eyes of your warriors, so to speak. Okay? I said, I'm going to gouge out all the right eyes, because in these days, there was a left-handed man was unheard of. Actually, a left-handed period was virtually unheard of. And so every time the Bible refers to a guy that happens to be left-handed, they make sure you know he was left-handed. Okay? It's like, but most people are fighting because it's with their right hand, and so if they were to gouge out their right eyes, if you were to do that to me, I would be literally incapable of doing just about everything because I'm so right-hand dominant. It's like, but it takes away your depth perception in order for you that you would not be able to fight effectively anymore just by gouging out the right eye. And so he says, let me make a treaty with you. I'm going to gouge out all your warriors' right eye, to where they cannot be able to fight. And so with this, he also says, though, that he's not just going to stop in Jabesh. He said, I'm going to disgrace Israel. That's my intentions. I am going to go through the whole country, and I'm going to bring disgrace on everyone. So that is the threat. And so with this, whenever we're seeing how this disgrace is coming up, I just think of a couple of tough guys. You know, my dad, I said he likes to refer to the middle school kids who think that they're really tough in school as it looks like a couple of banty roosters just squaring up to fight. Okay, and so he said, you know how it goes. Is that one of them threatens the one, the other one says, "Is that a threat?" Then the other one comes back, is like, "No, it's a promise." And then they continue to go through this whole process. And it's so ridiculous. It's like, but this is a promise, though. I mean, it just sure is done, is what we're looking at in this situation here. And so they ask, and so we see the men, they ask for 7 days. They're like, fine, take your 7 days. It'll probably save us a little bit of trouble, but to them, like I said, it just sure is done. And so they don't think anybody's going to come help them. All right? And so, but to go back through that history part that I talked to you guys about a second ago, this place of Jabesh, this will not be the first time somebody has drawn blood there. Okay? And if you are a student of the Bible and you've gone through Judges chapter 19 through 21, I'm going to do my best to keep this PG, but PG-13 is probably a little bit closer. I'm just going to be plain and blunt and roll right through this as we look at, or I just recall, this is the part of Judges 19 through 21. But essentially, civil wars broke out, okay, in Israel. What was the reason for it? The men, listen to me say this tribe, Benjamin, the men of Benjamin, have become so perverted that it's time to take them out. Okay, so that the people of God, they have realized just how bad this tribe has become because of sexual perversion, that they are going to wipe them off the face of the earth, essentially. And so with that, there was a man who was visiting Gibeah. Okay, so please be listening to these places as I'm bringing them up, because they all fall into this chapter. Gibeah, the men of Gibeah, and said somebody is visiting Gibeah. We said with his concubine. And all the perverted men come to the house saying, "Hey, we need that man." And for some atrocious reason, they don't send the man out. They send the woman, the concubine, out. And since a lot of things happen, and she ends up dead on the front porch. And so the man who owned the concubine takes her home, cuts her in 12 pieces, gives them to messengers, sends them all throughout Israel, saying, "Look what the men of Benjamin have done." And so all the people of Israel come out to be able to take off in a civil war against Benjamin. Benjamin starts off with 26,000. I said whenever they started the war, they end with 600 men. Okay, this was an absolute slaughter inside of Israel whenever this happened. But with that, how does Jabesh Gilead fit into this? They didn't go up in the civil war. They didn't go take arms against the people of their own country. They chose not to. And so what does the rest of Israel decide to do with Jabesh? They send 5,000 men to go wipe them out. All but 400 virgins. Okay? All but 400 virgins from Jabesh survive. And so this continues. This is within the 30 to 40-year window of 1 Samuel chapter 11, and these events happening. Okay, still pretty fresh. I can think of 9/11. I'm almost 30. That would have happened whenever I was 6 years old. Okay, there's something that is still pretty fresh on the minds of all of you guys who would have been adults for sure at the time of 9/11. People remember these things that are going on. But with this, they throw out their last-ditch efforts, like, we know who we can go talk to, okay? We'll go to Gibeah. So please keep tracking with me here. Because not only is this the present threat, these things that are happening in Jabesh and all these other things, but there is some past connections here. Because if we were to continue to read to the end of Judges chapter 21, where did the 400 virgins go that were saved from Jabesh? They had become wives of the men of Benjamin, because the country decided to have mercy on the tribe of Benjamin so that they would continue to be a tribe as one of their brothers. And so, let's just say in Jabesh, there's some blood relation. There's some connection. They are, as what we would say in Southwest Oklahoma, that they have some kin over in Jabesh Gilead, okay? And so whenever this news comes to Gibeah, this tribe of Benjamin, the people begin to weep. They have this family connection, and they know that this is about to be an extremely horrible situation, and the people begin to weep. And so notice how God was working in a past tragedy in order to begin to provide for this present solution now. Let's continue to move forward, though. That it's not just this crisis, but now let's see how God's Spirit is working through this crisis in verses 5 through 11. Verses 5 through 11 says this, "Now behold, Saul was coming from the field behind the oxen, and Saul said, What is wrong with the people? That they are weeping. So they told him the news of the men of Jabesh, and the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words, and his anger was greatly kindled. He took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by the hand of the messenger, saying, Whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen. Then the dread of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out as one man. When he mustered them at Bezek, the people of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. And they said to the messengers who had come, Thus shall you say to the men of Jabesh Gilead, Tomorrow, by the time the sun is hot, you shall have salvation. When the messengers came and told the men of Jabesh, they were glad. Therefore the men of Jabesh said, Tomorrow we will give ourselves up to you, and you may do to us whatever seems good to you. They lied to him. Okay? Verse 11. And the next day Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp in the morning watch and struck down the Ammonites until the heat of the day, and those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. So God's Spirit in crisis. Please, verses 3 and 4 of Psalm is here. And it says, Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep in the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. Whenever crisis comes our way, like we said, there's no simple solution to a crisis. But this is something where David has found himself inside of a crisis, and these are his words. How long? How long? He's being very real with God. But then he comes into this part of it, and he says, Consider, Lord. Answer me. It's like as if he knows that he's going to get an answer. His faith is in somebody that he knows is much greater than himself. And then he says right there that, Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. What is he asking God to do? Maybe illuminate the way. Show me something that I need to be able to see so I can continue to move forward in this desperate situation. Do you see whenever this comes and we feel like we're in a dark hole, we have no way out of it, that the Lord, whenever He intervenes, the solution is going to start to become clear, and we're going to know the plan of action that we must take. Okay? But without a crisis, we don't often see such work of God in our lives. This is something that a man named Rahm Emanuel, he's the chief of staff to the former President Obama. But he said in 2008 during the global financial crisis that he said this: You never want a crisis to go to waste. Okay? And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before. Now, he's no real philosopher, as if he's not the first person to say this before throughout history. Hitler has said it, okay? And so I'm just adding to the list, but there's many people who are in leadership realize that whenever a crisis comes, that's whenever you get opportunities to do things you never thought was possible. Okay? Now, if that's true in the secular world, let's just throw God's Spirit into the midst of it. Now, that it becomes that much more true whenever God is working out all of these things for good. And so we're looking at this crisis here. We're looking at all of these things happening, and as what we have gone through for Saul, he's a man of Gibeah. He said he's a man from the tribe of Benjamin. He has blood relations in Jabesh Gilead. So number one, that's one of those things that God has been working out. So the second thing here is that the Spirit of God rushes upon Saul. Okay? This is bringing back the idea of what Judges was like, that whenever God raised up deliverers, that He would have, the Spirit of God would rush upon them. As just think of Samson, that all of a sudden they have this strength, and they knew how to be able to take action because the Spirit of God has now rushed upon them. But guys, even in our day, I will say this real quick, that God's Spirit still comes and emboldens His people to take action when necessary. It's almost that there is an intense presence of God comes over you, and we know exactly what actions we must take because the Spirit of God has now lit up our eyes, so to speak. Okay, but then the third thing that Saul does here Okay? That he chops up an oxen. So thank goodness it wasn't another person. All right? But whenever he chopped up the oxen into 12 pieces, it would have reminded everyone of what happened 30 to 40 years ago. Okay? This is actually marking a new era in Israel. No longer are they in the times of the judges, but there's a new king in Israel, and this is marking a new era. But as it reminds them of the consequences of sin, this is something that it brings all of these things together, because the Spirit of the Lord was working on one man, and is in the eyes of the people, they're beginning to see, we also see what we're supposed to be doing now. Whenever they've all been in a time of questioning. Okay? And so notice here, Saul, he's living the way the Lord's calling him to in this moment. He's doing the right thing. But for the people, please look with me now, and at the end of verse 7, then the dread of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out as one man. Okay, there is a lot of people, a lot of preachers who don't like to talk about the fear of the Lord. But this word right here, it's very intentional, because dread literally means intense fear of the Lord. This isn't just, I'm scared to go in the dark. No. It is an intense fear that falls over the people of God. We have to be able to look into this word here and be able to see that God still works through fear. And so one of the things that we should, though, see is that whenever people talk about the fear of the Lord throughout the Old Testament, it is essentially synonymous with walking in the ways of the Lord and doing the things that He calls us to. Okay? And so if you show me somebody who spends their life really trying to follow God, we'd say, now that guy right there truly fears the Lord. Why? Because his sins have been ever before him. Okay? He knows the consequences of his sins because God has revealed it to him, and he knows that he was destined for destruction, and therefore the fear of the Lord has prompted him to live in the ways of the Lord. Okay? And so with this, does this happen in the New Testament? Absolutely. Acts chapter 5, we see Ananias and Sapphira. They lie to God's Holy Spirit, and they literally fall over dead in front of all the people inside of the place. Okay, this is the work of God's Spirit amongst the people, because it says that the fear of the Lord fell upon the people, and then as a whole, the church was united after it. Notice what happens here. Not one man, not two men, not most, not some, but all men come out as one man. Do you see what the dread of the Lord is doing amongst a group of people? We have to make this decision personally. Yes, I'm going to walk in the ways of the Lord, but whenever we all say it, because the fear of the Lord has really fallen on the hearts of everyone in here, all of a sudden we become a united people who are willing to walk in the ways of God. This is the working of God's Spirit in a crisis amongst a group of people. Guys, we get to see that today inside of God's church. As the Spirit of God comes and rests amongst a group of people, perhaps it's through revival, perhaps it's through a major tragedy inside of a city, or a community of believers, people being persecuted, it does nothing but unite the people of God in order for them to be able to face whatever the tragedy is. Guys, I don't pray for tragedies. I don't pray for crises. I don't pray for such things. But I can honestly go back and recount that every time I had some sort of crisis come up in my life, I only followed the Lord better because of it. I really had to get over myself going through it. But once I did, the Lord became much more beautiful to me than He ever was before. And as He does that amongst a whole group of people, we all come to the same conclusion, that the Lord and His ways are worth walking in and worth following with everything that we have. Okay, and so we see this happen. We see God bring this Spirit-filled leader. We see the people rally around him. And so in verses 8 through 11, the people lie to their enemies, okay? And then it all happens the next day to where they come in and they destroy the whole enemy army, to where virtually they are now incapable of taking over any other country, okay? And so as we see this, would we not just desire that for our church? Let me be clear. Let's not go to war. We're not going to destroy anybody. Okay, I'm not asking for that. But would we not desire for our church to come together and be like-minded so that we come out as one man? That should be something that we all desire. And whatever is necessary of God to bring us to become one man, and we say, Lord, let it be. Let it be. For His ways are much higher than ours. For He's the one who's going to bring it in to do all things, but if it's going to be through His people, may we do it in unity. That should be our desire as what we're looking through this passage. Anyways, let's go ahead and see what this unity leads to. Okay, so they fought the battle. They've accomplished the mission. So now it's time to really do something amazing. Okay, and I know for us, if we're not there, it wouldn't be. It's really hard to put ourselves there and be able to understand. But this is actually something extremely amazing in my books. But in verses 12 through 15, it says this: Then the people said to Samuel, "Who is it that said, 'Shall Saul reign over us?' Bring them in, that we may put them to death." But Saul said, "Not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has worked salvation in Israel." Then Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal, and there renew the kingdom." So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. They sacrificed peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. If you remember, whenever we stepped out of chapter 10 last week, that Saul has just became king. They've just crowned him. Then there's these men of valor that followed him home to kind of start the whole kingship process. But then there's these haters. It said up in verse 27. And they said, "How can this man save us?" And it's like, it doesn't matter. Anything in life, it's like, we're going to have these critics. Okay? I said, and I'm figuring that out, but this is still a divided country at this point, is what I'm saying. At the end of chapter 10, it is still a divided country. And so, after this great victory, whenever we come to verse 12, it's the people who has been with Saul the whole time, they say, "Where are those guys? Who said that Saul can't save us? Let's put them to death." Now, that seems like they're taking it a little bit too far there. But that's their attitude. They're running off the adrenaline of the recent victory. They want to rid the whole country of all the haters and whatever else. But in verse 13, Saul does the work of God. Okay, look with me here. That there's not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has worked salvation in Israel. You remember whenever the people asked to have a king that would be like all the other nations? All the other nations don't have a king that says that. All the other nations, they have kings that says, "Look away from God, look away from God." And He's saying that, "Hey, whoa, look to God right now, guys." Did you just miss what just happened? God did a work amongst us. And you want to kill somebody for it? Well, what are you thinking? Okay? I was like, this is a king not like the other nations. This is a king like Deuteronomy chapter 17 says the country of Israel needs, to direct people's focus back to God over and over again. And so in Psalm chapter 13, verses 5 through 6, "But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because He has dealt bountifully with me." David's able to be able to say in his darkest times, "But I trust in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation." Guys, you're in the middle of a desperate situation right now, and you've been asking, "When will I be relieved? God, when will I be relieved?" Let me ask you, have you prayed that verse 5? Have you really came to God honestly and said, but Lord, I know that I truly trust in your steadfast love, for it has never let me down. My heart will rejoice in your salvation, because any way that you choose to deliver me, I'm okay with it. It said, I'm okay with you taking me through the fire, because I know that you will walk with me. It said, through the fire. Have you really prayed your faith into God? Because that's what David is doing through that, and Saul is essentially doing the same thing. It's like, wait a minute, guys. Our faith belongs in him, not in me. Our faith belongs there, not with some human-made king. Okay? And so, that is an extremely, extremely important piece of this story, because later Saul's not going to be walking in this, but for the time being. Who put that in his heart? That was God himself. God is doing a work in Israel, and he's wanting everybody to recognize it as such. And Samuel, I said, he hears him say that, and he's like, let's renew the kingdom, okay? And so in verse 14, then Samuel said to the people, come, let us go to Gilgal, and there renew the kingdom. Now, I said, I didn't tell Brother Geary I was going to use this, and I will do it next time, but he has an old truck, okay? It's the yellow truck. All right, and so this is something I don't have any idea how old it is or anything like that, but whenever that truck was new, it had no need to be renewed, did it? And I said it was a new truck, okay? But over time, it became old, it deteriorated, and Geary restored it. It needed to be renewed. Okay, and so notice what has to happen. Something has to have begun, it has to grow old, and then it needs to be renewed. This whole king thing that we're talking about here is new to the country of Israel, right? I mean, Saul's the first one. And so whenever Samuel, he's calling for this renewal, he's talking about something that's deteriorated in the past. Okay? What's he talking about then? If he's not talking about Saul and renewing the kingdom, whose kingdom is he talking about renewing? God's kingdom. You're right. Okay? It's like, so even under a human king, God would remain the king. He'd be the one who is leading through his chosen king in order for the people to be able to see this is the way that we're supposed to go. And so, whenever he's renewing this, they're renewing the kingship of God. God is restoring the people back to where they will be able to have the proper focus. But notice where they do this at. And I know you guys don't always like the history lessons, but they do this at Gilgal. What's so important about Gilgal? Go to Joshua chapter 4, and it'll tell you what's so important about it. Whenever the people of Israel, they just came out of the wilderness for 40 years, and they're about to enter into the land of Canaan, they crossed the river at Gilgal. Okay, how do they cross the river? The Ark of the Covenant walks into the river backs up, all the people walk across like on dry land. They're then commanded to take up really large stones and then put them, as it out front of Gilgal, in order for them to be remembered what God has done through the past. In Joshua chapter 4, verses 21 through 24 says this, and he said to the people, when your children ask, I always like that. Whenever your children in the future ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean that they took out of the river? They're supposed to answer like this, then you shall let your children know Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Oh, now guys, if it's not really sinking in just quite yet, the place where they entered the land of Canaan for the very first time was in Gilgal. God was their king that day. And he puts up a reminder to remind them, God will always be your king. And so, in this renewal, they go back to the place where it all began, and they say, now God is still our king, as they recount the faithfulness of God, of what that monument was supposed to remind them as. And as a people of God, I said, if we were to go back through the history of this church, I think that we'd be able to go back through and recount the faithfulness of God. Our church would be a monument as a reminder that whenever times are getting tough, you say, look at that church right there, little Johnny or whomever. Let me tell you about what God has done through this church through the years. The faithfulness of God has been with the people who has rejected Him, just like you and I. But through the years, God has remained faithful. This should be the reminder that God is always mighty to save, even in dark circumstances. But see what that produces now. I've been talking about the fear of the Lord. You should know what intense fear feels like whenever we approach God. But it never stays there. Okay? Look with me, as I said at the end here, that they go to Gilgal and then they sacrifice the peace offerings before the Lord. And there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. All he can see is this worship service happening now. And this is the way that they would have been worshiping. That they're sacrificing peace offerings. Okay? We're getting an idea of reconciliation now. Okay, and not just this reconciliation between all the people and God, but I would go out on a limb and be able to argue that with a divided nation, there was probably a lot of reconciliation that needed to happen. And then God initiates this whole process of fixing relationships that have their roots and grudges for years. What did I just describe? I just described a community in Oklahoma. I said not just, and I'm not just talking about Granite. I'm talking about everywhere. Because whenever we get under the surface, there are grudges that are in years past, years and years and years. But then the Spirit of God comes over a group of people, and they're beginning to be able to see, wow, God brings everything into focus, and this grudge I've been hanging on to, it ain't worth it. This past is not worth it. I've been living for the wrong things and focusing on the wrong things. Ethan, he brings up this song, and we sing it in church somewhat regular, but just the heart of worship. It's like where we make church about so many other things besides God. It's like, and then this song is supposed to be something that refocuses the heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, it says. It's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing that I've made it. When it's all about you, and it's all about you, God. Whenever they are worshiping this day in Gilgal, that's what's happening. Not only Saul, but Samuel direct their focus right back to where it needs to be. And there's a healing for a divided Israel. That's what we should be desiring, right? But remember what I've talked about from the beginning is that this is a present threat, yeah. We're going to have such present threats. But the Lord has been working through generations past in order to provide a solution for our present situations. Okay? And whatever it is that you're going through this morning, if you find yourself in a very desperate situation, such things are happening in your personal life as well. God has not abandoned you. But we, like the people of Israel, tend to find ourselves abandoning Him and rejecting Him and His ways. There is no real fear of the Lord that dominates our hearts and our minds in order to walk in His ways consistently. Okay? And so the Lord's going to bring a movement among us. I just ask that His Spirit will come down and begin to unite us under His Spirit. But again, as we're just kind of wrapping this up, remember what Psalm 13 says, "But I have trusted in your steadfast love, and my heart shall rejoice in your salvation." At the end of the day, they're just rejoicing about the work that God has done. They're just singing the songs and having this great worship service about what God has done. And as I have said earlier, that every crisis that has hit me, I can assure you that it ends in rejoicing. That whenever the Lord really comes through, and I see it, it. Even though it didn't turn out exactly the way I hoped that it had, He took me through it and strengthened me through it. And because of that, I rejoice. Because at the other side of it, He is much more beautiful than He was before I started going through the crisis itself. And same thing that will happen amongst a group of people whenever God is beginning to do these things. And so with that, we're going to draw to a close here and just offer this time of response. If you have some sort of intense fear come over you because you're starting to realize your sins are ever before you, right now is the day of salvation. You guys come forward as we begin to sing, and we'll lead you to the Lord. Guys, there's been the convicting work of the Spirit of God is revealing to you that you have been living in a certain sin and you know you need to repent. Please do it whenever we begin to sing right now, today. The rest of us, nothing else is bothering you whatsoever. May we rejoice and worship together in unity as He's the one who is our common bond and our focus. Pray with me now. Dear Lord, You are the one in whom we trust. God, You must be the one in whom we trust. And there are people in here I know that don't trust You. In fact, it is that, Lord, that they are living their lives without You. And Lord, as I'm just bringing all of that up, You know it. But Father, all we do is trust You. And we trust them just that they will be in Your hands in order to do a work in their hearts. Lord, You are the one who does all the saving. You're the one who provides salvation. Lord, You're the one who renews people whenever, Lord, we have been walking a life of sin, though we belong to You. God, You are the one who brings worship about in our hearts. Lord, You are the beginning of all things, and Lord, You should be the end of all things as well. And so, Father, as You just doing this work to refocus us, I pray, Father, that You will continue to carry it out through this week, giving us what we need for Your name's sake. And it's in order for us to be able to live for Your name wherever we may go. But Lord, right now, may we respond in Your name. Pray all this in Your name. Amen.